With housing affordability still out of reach for so many, it may be worth considering what Singapore is doing, where home ownership over the last 40 years has climbed from 60 to 88%. Singapore's government established the Housing Development Board back in the 60s in response to the country's burgeoning squatter colonies and housing shortage. The body acts as a housing developer by planning and building housing estates and homes on public and reclaimed land. It provides finance and allows buyers to dip into their compulsory savings to fund the purchase. Eligibility is limited by income and age. Homeowners are also required to hold on to the property for at least 5 years. It is leasehold only, and there are income and citizenship restrictions on future buyers. So, would such a system work here? Sydney University's research fellow Cameron Murray thinks so. He's proposing a local version called Housemate, which could dramatically reduce the cost of buying a home. To discuss the model as well as other ideas around housing, I'm joined by Cameron and Nerida Conisbee, Chief Economist at Ray White from Sydney. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Cameron, if I can begin with you, can you take me through exactly how Housemate works?
Right, so Housemate is inspired by Singapore's housing system and adopted for Australia, and essentially what it would do is offer an option outside private ownership and private rental markets for Australians for housing. It would be a publicly run housing developer that would offer home ownership to any eligible buyer who doesn't already own property at a discounted price. So the price would be roughly 30% less than the equivalent private dwelling. And buyers would be able to use their superannuation as a deposit and to repay the mortgage, because owning a home is one of the best investments you can make in retirement. And Housemate would also offer discounted mortgages to those buyers to undercut that interest margin and further add additional savings. So I estimate for young families buying in Housemate instead of the private sector, you'd be able to reduce costs by 50 to 70% through those critically important years where your spending needs are higher, especially when you're raising children.
So Cameron, the Singapore model works because the government there owns a very high percentage of land, which is a vastly different story from here. So how would you overcome that in Australia?
Yeah, so a lot of people point out that difference, but it's not such a major difference. So I've proposed to get land into Housemate through a number of means, including using underutilised council, state and federal lands. But you can also compulsorily acquire land, just as we do for roads and other important infrastructure that we invest in for the community. So it's certainly not a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, in an economic sense, this method used by Singapore still has the same opportunity cost that we say in economics of selling that land to the private market. So in terms of the economics of it, it's much the same. It's just a small administrative difference.
So Nerida, what do you make of Housemate? Would it work here? What are the pros and cons? And is it sensible dipping into superannuation when that really wasn't the intended purpose?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt affordability is a huge issue in Australia. The multiple of household incomes to house prices has risen in Sydney from about a 4 times multiple in the early 80s to around a 15 multiple. I think Cameron's right. Looking to Singapore for first home buyers is a good idea. They do have very high levels of first ownership. They have tackled it. The challenge, of course, comes down to land. The Singapore government does own 90% of land in Singapore. Our governments own substantially less. Also a lot around location. I mean, one of the challenges at the moment in Australia is that there is affordable housing, but it's often in places where people can't live or find it difficult to live or find it difficult to find employment. As you said, the other issues around superannuation, and I have a lot of reservations about people dipping into superannuation to buy their family home, and primarily because once you hit retirement, you've still got the family home, you still need to live in it, you may need to use it when you moved into retirement living or aged care, but it is an illiquid asset, and you then at retirement may have substantially less cash as a result of buying a home very early on in your earning career.
Cameron, do you expect that the government may look into your idea of Housemate seriously?
Look, I'm putting it out there to start the conversation. It's a long road between an idea and something being implemented. but I have had success putting ideas out there historically. For example, the windfall gains tax that Victoria introduced was an idea I put out in 2016 in a report, and it got adopted last year. So there's a long road ahead of changing the conversation, but I think it's possible, and I think an approach of just giving it a try is the approach I'm pushing, because there's really no harm building houses for people.
Nerida, we know that it is an election year. Do you think this will start a conversation, and do you expect us to see some bold housing initiatives on the campaign trail?
Yeah, look, I think we will. You know, affordability will be a key election issue. It is the big challenge at the moment when you've seen a 30% price increase since the start of the pandemic. I mean, some suburbs have seen $1 million increases. We've seen prices double over a 12-month time period. So affordability is an issue. It cuts across all income levels. It cuts across all housing types and all family types. We know that build to rent is a big focus area at the moment, so really focusing on people that are long-term renters who may never be able to get into the housing market because they don't even have access to any superannuation or even a decent wage.
So Cameron, does build to rent help with affordability?
Yeah, build to rent's become very popular as a policy response, but I haven't seen any evidence yet that it actually helps with affordability. For example, Australia's biggest build to rent project is the Smith Collective on the Gold Coast, and what we've seen in the last 12 months there is rents rising in that project just as much as they have anywhere else on the Gold Coast. So it's not clear to me there are gains for tenants from having different private rental owners in the build to rent format rather than other landlord types. So I think it's a bit of a distraction.
Cameron Murray from the University of Sydney and Nerida Conisbee from Ray White, Chief Economist. Thanks both for your time.
Thank you.
Guys.